Hi everyone, and welcome to this episode of Imminent Marketing. Today I am talking to Alistair and Karol from a company called MIDiA Research. They do a bundle of work looking at the current state and the future of a number of industries, including gaming, sports, and media. We dive into a number of conversations around, for example, the rise of e-gaming and esports and what's going on in the streaming world. So sit back and enjoy. Welcome. Thank you for coming along. So you guys are from a company called MIDiA Research, happen to be down the office, in the same building as us, which is pretty useful. You're doing some really interesting sort of insight work into a number of industries. And I was looking through your site, and I think that one of the key things, one of the repeated themes that comes out time and time again is this idea of peak attention, which is not a term I'd actually heard before. Maybe I've had my eyes closed, but I was wondering if you could talk about like what is peak attention, and what does that mean for brands and companies?
Sure. So it all comes from the concept of how to compete in what we call the attention economy. And so before the advent of the smartphone, consumers had lots and lots of available downtime. Those were sort of things like staring out of the window or waiting out at a bus stop, etc. And in came the smartphone, and all of these little pockets of time started to get filled. Those were, sort of the first foray into mobile games, etc., which is where the mobile gaming market actually got kind of its heyday from at first. But then came music streaming, then came video streaming, it came podcasts, you had digital news, and all of these attention-seeking propositions. And suddenly, as consumers kept adopting all of these things, they started tapping out on that available time they originally had. And this is what we kind of call the peak attention economy. Consumers simply now no longer have additional attention or time to allocate on all of these new things that are coming into market. And that's when they are actually going to have started to prioritize between these propositions. So the big change that has happened for several years ago and now at the peak of the attention economy is that you're no longer competing for available time as you used to, but every new and sort of additional growth now is going to come at the expense of somebody else, because you don't have to dethrone somebody's opposition.
I mean, and I can see that already in my day-to-day. So I know when I get on the train, I'm torn between, am I listening to Audible or am I listening to the backlog of podcasts that I've got sitting there in my Overcast account or whatever. What's the ramifications of that? I mean, what does that mean now as a brand? How should I start thinking about this?
Well, it's. I mean, I guess I'll.
My thought on it is that you need to sort of create a one-stop shop for content, so you can serve all use cases. So if you're a podcast creator, but you might then lose your audience's attention to, say, a Netflix episode. But if you're an Amazon, you're looking to create an all-encompassing offering and retain consumers within your ecosystem. I think that's the milestone you need to reach. To basically, as soon as you're losing consumers' attention somewhere else, they're at risk of churning or of losing them for good, especially as consumers are specializing with how many services they engage with. But if you can serve multiple use cases, so you can flip between listening to music and watching something, I think that's where.
So are we seeing that? Is there anywhere where we're seeing that yet?
The plays by Disney. So if you look at their bundle of Hulu and ESPN Plus, it's more on the video side, but they're serving multiple content genres. So it's not just scripted drama and film like a Netflix, but they've also got the live news and the live sports that appeals to a wider audience. But then you've also got the argument with all these. So sports was late to the sort of streaming party. And they're being disrupted now by the companies like 11 Sports in the UK, which struggled because of the content they had. And then you've got the likes of DAZN, that are sort of the home of boxing in the States. But they're a pure play sports service. So again, serving one use case isn't going to resonate with the masses as much as if you can serve all. And that's where someone like Disney's got a foothold in that space.
Absolutely. And so just to add to that, I mean, going even a step further, this is absolutely happening in terms of video. But actually, it's happening sort of beyond video as well. So those ecosystems, if you sort of take entertainment as such, you've got sort of the tech majors, the sort of Apples, Amazons of this world, that are actually making sure that they can, sort of retain the consumers inside their ecosystems And that's why they provide all of these entertainment propositions. So for them, it's essentially all a play to sell more hardware, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they want to make sure that your experience once you bought that hardware is you've got your music, you've got your video, you've got your games.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly with Amazon, so having the cross entertainment play, and that really goes a long way in making sure your consumers never need to leave.
Didn't I read recently? Haven't Amazon sort of made some pitch as well for a whole load of sports rights? Very recently, I think.
Well, they're growing out that proposition, and they had their debut of the Premier League recently.
That was it, yeah.
And they've got the Boxing Day fixtures as well, so they can do simultaneous live streams of games.
They're coming for us.
I think they've got 72 odd commentators, so they're just going really at it. But it's been quite well received from the consumer standpoint because they're doing things like stats.
Yeah.
And it's just a new way, and apparently there hasn't been much problem with the latency, which is a big problem for streaming of live sports so far.
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to see how they get on. I know that they're, especially in Europe, they're trying to acquire more premium rights. Yeah.
Well, I guess when we get 5G and things like that come into play, then all that starts to fall away. So where do these, what happens with all these? Like right now, I've got Netflix, Amazon Prime. Now we've got Apple, Disney. Like, where does this all go? Because it feels like they're chasing after a finite amount of content. And if they all let's say they all buy some portion of it up, am I just left having to have multiple subscriptions of hundreds of pounds a month across them all, or where do you think this is all going to go eventually?
Well, we field consumer surveys every quarter. If you look at the trends over time, consumers holding multiple subscriptions of like Amazon and Netflix and such is decreasing. So they're already specializing where they're spending their finite money and their finite attention, because again, you don't want to have to spend time discovering and popping between platforms to basically find different content.
Yeah.
So if one can aggregate all the content you want and serve all your use cases, then I think you'll stick with that one.
This is where I sort of starting to measure things like consumer sentiment is becoming really, really important, because for now, everyone's sort of competing to grab engagement and time spent from consumers. And most companies, specifically in the video landscape, have been doing that by producing lots of content, lots of original content, etc. And we feel that we're now at a point where you've got all of this content. Arguably, the last thing consumers need right now is more content. Where we've landed at is we now spend more and more time actually trying to decide what to watch, trying to browse, on your sort of subscription video service. And if you say I used to give, let's say, Netflix 2 hours of my evening, and I now find myself browsing for 20 minutes before I make a decision. I actually now only get entertained for 1 hour 40, because the 20 minutes that I spend browsing, to me as a consumer, is largely work. I no longer can add those 20 minutes to my session because we are at the peak of the attention economy. I simply haven't got those 20 minutes to make it 20 minutes longer. So where we are at now is that I pay the same amount of money for the proposition, but I am getting entertained for shorter. We literally, ironically, landed at the point where more content can now mean less entertainment for the consumer. And so I think that's a really, really important thing that has changed. And I don't know if companies are quite measuring or catching this yet. Because if you are somebody like, I keep saying Netflix, but I mean any sort of subscription video service, you may see from the metrics that I'm still there for 2 hours. You may even see that I'm browsing for 20 minutes. You may consider that as win, because look at how much discovery I'm doing. But what you are not capturing is that I, as a consumer, get a little bit more fed up with every next session that I have to do this. And that's going to start playing a lot more, an increasing role, really, as sort of times get tougher, as there is more content, more market entrants, and generally the need for that prioritization on the consumer side gets more intensified. And that's when everybody, once you have to start prioritizing, you start remembering, okay, how do I actually feel towards this service? That's when all of that sentiment that you have been building up will sort of come back to the
quite
top.
Interesting ways. It's almost ironic in some ways. It's almost like coming full circle, because ultimately you're going to get back to a situation where the best content is going to win out. you may have the platform with the most content on it, but if Netflix has got the top 10 seasons of the year, and Amazon's got 100 times more pieces of content, but it's not the top 10 seasons, then they're going to win out because the amount of attention I can give is limited. So I'm just going to go where the best content is, so to speak. So all of a sudden, quality comes back up. How is it? What's your take on them? From a personal health point of view, if we're at this sort of peak attention, is there I don't know if you've looked into this, but is there ramifications for people just generally living their day? If I'm constantly, if I'm constantly entertained, there's no downtime, like even, there's no standing in a queue looking out a window to your view, sitting on a train, but is there anything work being done in that area, looking at what that means for us as people?
So I think there is, the key next challenge now that we are sort of in this age of information and content overload, and our brains are really trying to deal not just with, the ads you see and the content you see, but all the, billboards that that your brain still processes, even though you're not looking at them as you pass them by. I think the next big thing and challenge for companies is to allow consumers to give them something to make sense of this all. How do you make sure that you actually allow them to and enable them to browse and discover all of this content in a, actually an efficient and somewhat of an enjoyable manner? How do you make sure that doesn't become work and that consumers don't fall victims to the tyranny of choice that they've been presented with at the moment? So I think the pendulum kind of, as much as it has been going towards the content side of things, I think we've slightly overdone that. Right. And it's actually going to start swinging back towards optimizing the technology, discovery, improving the interfaces, but also making sure that you promote your media assets outside of these sessions. Promoting stuff at places where people don't expect it, where it can be surprising and delightful in a way, and create some sort of experiences as you go, not just sort of push information about a product.
Do you think there's any implications for the ad industry, given that a lot of these subscription providers don't run ads? Netflix doesn't run ads. If I'm interfacing with an Alexa, or I'm not really being presented with ads in that situation. Is it going to cause a crisis? Just an opinion. Do you think it's going to cause a crisis in the ad world, where all of a sudden we're at peak attention, there is no room left to squeeze ads in, because consumers just won't accept it. They don't want that.
I think talking of companies that get quite creative, so Tencent in China, they're incorporating adverts within the content, sort of product placement and use of AR. And I think we've seen that with football and live streaming of sports. The banner around the pitch, they're now sort of, through AR, you can now present a tailored advert to circle around the pitch while you're watching it. So I think technology is going to help them stay in the game, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think advertising isn't necessarily going anywhere. Of course, there are some challenges with generally the digital transformation and the adoption of subscription services. So part of this is, the more people spend time behind paywalls that often have no ads, the smaller pool of people is actually targetable by the traditional advertising, right? And also, so that pool of people that you used to be able to target via sort of conventional ads is getting smaller in size. But at the same time, the people who adopt these subscription services are often the highest engaged and spending people in the ecosystem, right? So not only is that pool shrinking in size, it's also shrinking in value. So that's, I would say, definitely a challenge for the advertising world. But agree with Alistair that, sort of technology is sort of the
advertisers will find a way. Where there's attention, they're gonna find
one key thing that I would say does need to change, and I think some companies have already started working on it, but I think there is still some way to go, is that the key aim of an advert, say 100 years ago, was to give consumers some sort of information. Just tell them, hey, we've got this product, go and get it. Now that need for that information has become a little bit, sort of less needed, so to say, because information is everywhere. You can get your information, it's anytime you want. It's just a sort of finger swipe away. So I think that the key value from advertisement has been kind of lost a little bit, but the formats haven't adjusted. I don't think, I think the next thing for advertising is to make sure that they actually provide experiences and, sort of foster the emotion that is, sort of wrapped around any sort of product, rather than sort of, shoving the information in your face. It needs to still be something that's somehow surprising and delightful to the consumer.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of talk about this, but I think it's the idea of brand becomes much more important again. All of a sudden, it's not about, okay, this burger's so thick and has so much cheese on it. It's about, it's a Byron burger or whatever, because the way that we're going to interface with some of these technologies means that actually what you're really looking for is people to associate burgers, Dysons, whatever, whatever. That's what they're after, is that you associate those brands with those products, whatever they happen to be.
I think it relates back to Karol's point on sentiment as well. But from like a personal use case, where I see advertising working, or on me anyway, is on social platforms like Instagram, especially around the Christmas period when you're shopping. And I'm getting these sponsored ads on clothes and presents, and I'm more engaged and likely to engage with these adverts than I would before a YouTube video, which I'm just going to skip. So, yeah, it's personalization and serving people what they want rather than just information.
Yeah. And making it part of the whole experience, sort of baking it in rather than, sorry to interrupt this, we're now going to tell you about a big product.
Yeah. How about then, so I was reading a post on your blog recently, and it was talking about brands that were relying on specific, or building their brand off the back of specific creators. And it gives a good example in that post. And anyway, I was wondering whether you could talk about that a little bit. What the danger is, or what the sort of worry or the concern, I guess, that you were picking up there.
So I think no matter who you are or what you are, whether you are a football club or a sort of streaming platform, you always want to make sure that your organization is bigger than one individual talent. If you don't, it obviously causes trouble when that talent leaves, whether it's your star football player or whether it's sort of Ninja leaving Twitch and going to Mixer. The flip side of things is always, of course, if you can get somebody sort of star-like, you can get a lot of engagement out of it. But when you are doing it, you need to make sure as a company that you're sort of preparing yourself for the day that you may need to part ways, and that you actually can build up propositions that are just as engaging in the meantime.
It was, I think, the point you made in the presentation recently on the number of originals that Netflix have produced. So to try and keep their platform relevant, they've created now, is it 1,000?
Yeah, I think they've got about 1,000 originals.
Up from one in 2012 or something. So, but then they're enforcing the tyranny of choice and too much content.
Yeah.
And then as more services come to market, like Disney, HBO Max and Peacock, we're seeing content creators starting to pull their content, as Karol mentioned, losing their big stars. Disney with its Marvel, Friends leaving, and The Office, which is sort of one of Netflix's biggest binged shows. I think that's when
this is sort of weaponizing that you sort of
exactly.
talking about.
So I think that's when platforms like Netflix become a destination, not a sort of, you don't go there for the content, you just go to Netflix, whereas you go to Disney for not only the content but also the brand as well. So I think that's going to be the battle.
And is the other risk that now for an individual creator, it's so easy. If they built an audience somewhere, it's so easy for them to then decide, well, I could independently go off and drive my own. It's the amount of choice they have in terms of where they could go to sort of deliver for that audience is almost infinite. And so the risk is you build up a couple of key stars on your platform and you have no real control over them once they've got an audience disappearing. Okay, so there was another thing that I want to talk to you about, which is this sort of rise of live gaming, which is And I've only come across this recently because we started working with a few companies in the field, and I had no idea how big it actually was. And I'm not a gamer, so that's partly one of the reasons. But I'm sure most people don't understand how big this actually has gotten, and how it feels very much like we're only at the beginning of this sort of esports type thing. I was wondering if you could talk about the rise of that and what that means for the entertainment world and brands, and how they should be thinking about that.
Yeah, so I think it is absolutely a growing phenomenon. It is still niche in terms of its sort of consumer penetration, but is nonetheless grabbing all the headlines. I think there are a number of opportunities and reasons why companies are becoming so interested in the segment. One, gaming has generally just penetrated the general public. I mean, you've got well over a third of the 16 plus online population plays games on mobile, console, or PC these days. So gaming has become sort of like a cultural denominator alongside what music you used to listen to or what clothes you used to wear. Gaming is firmly embedded there, and there are a couple of opportunities there. Specifically, of course, you've got it's a market ripe for a lot of sponsorships, live events, etc. But just as importantly, if not more importantly, actually, is the opportunity around broadcast media rights, right? You've got essentially like a very, very valuable assets to current sports teams are, sort of live games broadcast. And companies are still kind of trying to figure out what the right format is, what the commentary should look like, etc. But there is nothing to stop us from thinking that in a few years those rights will be reaching sort of similar importance as the current sports rights, because it's live, it's live entertainment, it's got a competitive aspect to it, and it's a competitive aspect for an activity that's adopted by a really large part of the general public. So if anything, actually, you've got certain sports that sort of are more popular or less popular. You've got, I guess, gaming, whereby you are going to find gamers from across genres actually just engaging in watching esports.
That's why I sort of wonder: is there, given that gaming or specific games can traverse across multiple geographies, whereas sport, on the other hand, can be quite even the biggest sports, whether it's football or basketball, they don't necessarily traverse across all geographies, whereas gaming appears to just doesn't matter. It's like I wonder whether it could. Do you think it's ever going to be bigger? Could it be bigger than more traditional sport? Do you think, or
I'm not sure if it would be bigger yet, but it was I think Liverpool CEO Peter Moore, I think that's his name. He said that he's worried about losing fans to gaming because even from our surveys we can see the propensity for them to play video games rather than watch live sports. Partly because of the length of time that it takes to watch a game. If you're talking American football, it's 3 hours. Basketball as well, baseball especially. It just doesn't resonate with that audience anymore. Who haven't potentially spending too much time gaming, so they're not actually playing at a grassroots level.
Do they build fans? These esports? Do they sort of build fan bases in the same way that traditional, Liverpool, for example, obviously it's got its fan base. Do you get the same thing with teams in?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. So I remember being at Gamescom a few years back, and that was kind of when I first thought to myself, "Wow, this is really becoming big." You've had stands that were selling esports team merchandise with a good half an hour, 45-minute queue of people wanting to buy a jersey of their favorite esports team and an esports athlete.
So cool.
To them, these people are, just as distinguished as to perhaps to myself as a pro sports athlete. There is a whole amount of rigor that they need to put into their trainings. It's sort of hours and hours of dedication, and there is a skill involved, right? So.
Although it's almost like you can liken it to, you think if you went back right to say, 1940s, or maybe, where before music became a big, fan-based mainstream sort of pop music, it's only been around for sort of 100 years or so. that was such a cultural change, and it's sort of changing again now, almost on the reverse. But this is, you can almost liken it to that. You can see there's this whole new thing that's cropped up. There's a generation of kids that have, grown up with gaming, and now all of a sudden they can interact with it in a completely different way. It's fascinating to watch.
It's not going anywhere as well.
No, that's for sure.
So I think companies like the NBA, then they did a partnership with Take-Two Interactive. They've launched an NBA 2K league. So every franchise in the real world has its own designated esports team. And that's how potentially fans are going to engage with the sport on a virtual level. And then
so your Liverpool, guy who's worried about, I was going to suggest that the way for him is to embrace it essentially and sort of try and build that out in the gaming world as well.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. I think NBA is going exactly the right direction in terms of this. The key thing is for all the sort of traditional sports to make sure that this is an opportunity to embrace rather than something to compete against. This is just something that's happening. It's not something you can stop. And so I think the sports that are going to do best out of it are going to be the ones that are going to embrace the esports aspect as a wider part or an extension to sports. I think we're going to see esports at the Olympics very soon, actually. So they've already been considered in the Asian Games, I think, last year. Yeah. And, really there is no reason not to. The only argument that I think the Olympic Commission has been making is sort of that they want to be careful about, sort of promoting sort of violent games and stuff like that. But actually, if you think about Olympic disciplines like fencing,
wrestling,
archery,
boxing,
wrestling, all of these things historically came from, unfortunately, killing people. But the Olympic Committee has recognized there's some sort of skill involved, and there are now targets. You are not, the archers are not shooting live people, and just in that same sort of angle, from that same angle, there could be a game where you might have something like Call of Duty, but you don't see, sort of people dying and blood. You'll see moving targets or what have you. It can be adjusted. Yeah. But the argument alone that, this is to do with violence, to me, just does not hold up if you're going to sort of keep consistent across disciplines.
Fantastic. Great stuff. Well, listen, thanks a lot. So you guys, the big fields that you work in are, let me see if I can get this right, sport, gaming, media, what were the other two?
We've got music and TV.
Music and TV. Okay, so and they're the sort of key fields you're looking into. So if people want to go and find out more about what you guys do, where do they go? What's the best way to get hold of you?
I'd say probably visit MIDiaresearch.com. It's MIDiA. And we've got sort of like a free weekly briefing. You can sign up for free to a newsletter where we kind of send out a very sort of short, brief take on some of the key news developments across the coverage areas that you've just mentioned. So it's kind of like, get up to speed with A, what has happened, but B, what the MIDiA take on things is.
Cool. All right. Well, we'll put the sort of details in the notes so people can get a hold of it. But thank you for your time. That was fantastic.
Thanks
really
interesting.
Thank you. Cheers.
So that's a wrap on this episode of Imminent Marketing. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please don't forget to subscribe or share the podcast. And we look forward to seeing you again next time on Imminent Marketing.